6 months. That's how long Ethan Cole vanished without a single word to the woman he once promised to spend the rest of his life with. No goodbye letter. No screaming match. No broken dishes scattered across a kitchen floor. No dramatic confrontation in the middle of the night. One moment he was there, standing in the warm yellow light of their suburban home just outside Denver, Colorado, and the next, he was gone so completely it felt like he had never existed at all. His phone number stopped working before sunrise. His social media accounts disappeared by noon. By the end of the week, even his coworkers claimed they had no idea where he went. To everyone around Natalie Harper, Ethan became a ghost. But what made the entire thing unbearable wasn't the silence itself. It was the reason behind it. Because Ethan didn't disappear after some ugly divorce battle or years of hatred building inside their marriage. He vanished less than 2 hours after discovering that his wife had been sleeping with another man behind his back for nearly 8 months. And according to the private investigator Natalie later hired to find him, Ethan had spent those final 2 hours inside the house calmly deleting every trace of himself from her life before walking out the front door forever. The strangest part was the way he left. Most people imagine betrayal ending with chaos. Angry shouting, tears, threats, maybe violence. Something loud enough to match the damage. But Ethan never raised his voice once. The security camera outside their garage captured him carrying a single suitcase to his truck at exactly 11:43 p.m. He paused only once, standing motionless beside the driver's door as rain poured across the driveway. Then he climbed inside and drove away into the darkness without looking back at the house they bought together 5 years earlier. Natalie replayed that footage hundreds of times over the next several months, trying to understand what was happening inside his head during those final seconds. Was he heartbroken? Numb? Angry? Or had he already accepted that the woman waiting inside that house was no longer the person he thought he married? What disturbed her most was how calm he looked. No panic. No rage. Just quiet finality. Like a man closing the last chapter of a book he no longer wanted to read. For 187 days, Natalie searched for him. She called hospitals first because part of her convinced herself something terrible had happened after he left. Then she contacted police departments across 3 states. She called old college friends, former coworkers, distant relatives, people Ethan hadn't spoken to in years. Nobody gave her answers. Some refused to speak to her entirely after learning why Ethan disappeared. Others simply said the same thing over and over again. Leave him alone. At first, Natalie believed Ethan was trying to punish her. She told herself he wanted her to suffer the same confusion and betrayal he felt the moment he uncovered the messages hidden inside her laptop. Explicit texts, hotel receipts, photos she forgot to delete. Months of lies exposed all at once because she carelessly left her email account open on the kitchen counter while answering the front door for a food delivery. It took less than 5 minutes for Ethan's entire understanding of his marriage to collapse. And somehow Natalie still believed he would eventually come back once his anger faded. She didn't understand that men like Ethan rarely explode when they break. Sometimes they simply disconnect emotionally so completely that returning becomes impossible. The affair itself would later become a nightmare far bigger than Natalie ever imagined because the man she cheated with wasn't just some random coworker from out of town. His name was Connor Wells, a charismatic financial consultant Ethan introduced to Natalie during a family wedding in Nashville. Connor happened to be married to Ethan's cousin Claire. That detail turned what could have remained a private disaster into public humiliation across 2 families. According to people who attended the wedding reception, Ethan spent nearly 15 minutes giving a heartfelt speech about loyalty, commitment, and finding someone you trust enough to build your entire future around. Meanwhile, only a few rooms away, his wife was inside a storage hallway with another woman's husband. Natalie would later admit the memory haunted her every night after Ethan disappeared because she remembered hearing Ethan's voice echo faintly through the ballroom walls while Connor kissed her neck and laughed quietly about how close they were to getting caught. That single moment would eventually destroy 4 lives at once. When Ethan discovered the truth later that week, he apparently read every message from beginning to end in total silence. Natalie tried explaining afterward that Connor meant nothing emotionally, that the affair was impulsive and reckless and never supposed to become real. But according to her own account during therapy sessions months later, Ethan barely reacted at all. He simply closed the laptop, walked upstairs, packed a suitcase, and removed his wedding ring before setting it carefully beside the kitchen sink. Natalie cried, begged, blocked the front door, at one point demanding he say something, anything. Ethan only looked at her once before leaving. That look stayed with her longer than the affair itself because there was no hatred inside it. No fury, just disappointment, so deep it almost looked empty. And maybe that was worse. Hatred still carries emotion. Hatred means someone cares enough to hurt. But indifference feels colder. Final. Like mourning someone who is technically still alive. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By the second month after Ethan vanished, people online had already started calling it one of the coldest relationship disappearances they had ever heard about. Thousands of strangers who had never met Natalie Harper were suddenly debating her marriage across Reddit forums, YouTube comment sections, and late-night relationship podcasts. Some people viewed Ethan as a man who finally reclaimed his dignity after discovering the ultimate betrayal. Others believed disappearing without explanation was cruel, no matter what Natalie had done. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. There was something deeply unsettling about how calmly Ethan erased himself from existence. Most betrayed spouses demand answers. They scream. They rage. They expose. Ethan did none of those things. He simply vanished with the precision of someone emotionally finished long before he physically walked away. And that silence became the part Natalie could not escape. If Ethan had screamed at her, maybe she could have defended herself. If he had insulted her, maybe she could have hated him back. But he gave her nothing. No emotional reaction to hold on to. No final argument. Just absence. The deeper people looked into the story, the uglier it became. Natalie's affair with Connor Wells had not started at the Nashville wedding itself, like many first assumed. According to later reports from friends close to the couple, the relationship began nearly 8 months earlier during a corporate charity event in Chicago. Connor was charming in a way Ethan never tried to be. He walked into rooms like he already belonged there. Expensive suits. Expensive watches. The kind of confidence that made people feel important simply by standing next to him. Natalie later admitted that Connor made her feel exciting again during a period of her life where everything had become painfully routine. Ethan was dependable, steady, loyal, but somewhere over the years she stopped appreciating stability and started viewing it as boredom. Connor represented risk, secrecy, adrenaline. Every hidden text message gave her the same rush gamblers describe moments before placing a dangerous bet. The problem was that people rarely think clearly while chasing excitement. They only think about consequences after everything collapses. What made the betrayal especially devastating for Ethan was the personal connection between everyone involved. Connor Wells wasn't just another man. He had spent holidays inside Ethan's home, shared beers with him during football games, sat beside him during family cookouts. Claire Wells, Connor's wife and Ethan's cousin, considered Natalie one of her closest friends. There were photos online showing the four of them smiling together on beach vacations less than a year before everything exploded. Looking back at those images later became unbearable for people close to the family because everyone now knew what was secretly happening behind those smiles. Several relatives would later describe Ethan and Claire as the true victims in the situation because neither of them saw the betrayal coming. They trusted completely. And trust, once broken at that level, changes people permanently. Friends who knew Ethan before the affair described him as warm, social, easygoing. The man Natalie eventually found months later in Oregon barely resembled that version anymore. He still smiled occasionally, according to co-workers, but there was a distance inside him now, like someone who learned the hard way that even the people closest to you can become strangers overnight. As Natalie's personal life collapsed, the internet turned her into a symbol of public shame. Screenshots of her messages with Connor spread rapidly after an anonymous account uploaded them online. Nobody ever confirmed who leaked the conversations, although Natalie privately believed Claire was responsible after discovering the affair destroyed her marriage too. Some messages were graphic enough that YouTube creators and podcast hosts blurred portions while discussing the scandal. Others focused on one specific exchange that made public opinion turn especially vicious against Natalie. During one conversation with Connor only minutes before sneaking away together at the wedding reception, Natalie joked that Ethan was probably giving another one of his painfully sincere speeches while she was finally having fun for once. When people read those messages beside clips from Ethan's actual wedding speech praising loyalty and commitment, sympathy for Natalie disappeared almost overnight. Even people who normally defended cheating scandals admitted there was something unusually cruel about the timing. Ethan unknowingly stood in front of his own family, celebrating love, while his wife betrayed him nearby with another woman's husband. The humiliation became impossible to separate from the affair itself. Then came the part that disturbed everyone watching the story unfold. Ethan never defended himself publicly. He never posted angry videos exposing Natalie, never released statements online, never tried controlling the narrative at all. While Natalie spent weeks obsessively searching his name across social media, Ethan quietly removed himself from every platform without explanation. His Instagram vanished first. Then Facebook. LinkedIn disappeared soon afterward. Even old gaming profiles connected to usernames he used for years suddenly became inactive. Friends later claimed Ethan changed phone numbers, transferred retirement accounts, and accepted a remote software engineering position under a shortened version of his middle name before leaving Colorado entirely. It was as if he wanted no digital connection remaining between himself and the life he abandoned. That level of emotional detachment frightened Natalie more than anger ever could because it forced her to confront a possibility she never considered before. What if Ethan wasn't planning to come back at all? What if the marriage ended emotionally the exact moment he discovered the truth? And what if every desperate attempt she made to contact him afterward only confirmed he made the right decision by disappearing? The private investigator Natalie eventually hired, a former detective named Marcus Reed, would later tell her something that stayed in her mind long after their first meeting ended. People who leave suddenly usually leave traces behind, he explained while reviewing Ethan's financial records and phone activity. Emotional people make mistakes. Angry people make mistakes. Your husband didn't. Marcus had investigated missing persons for almost 15 years before becoming a PI, and according to him, Ethan's disappearance felt less like panic and more like preparation. Every shared account had been divided carefully. No suspicious withdrawals. No emotional texts sent to friends. No drunken calls in the middle of the night. Ethan acted with the calm precision of someone who spent hours thinking before making a final decision. Marcus even pointed out that Ethan never attempted revenge against Natalie despite having enough evidence to publicly destroy her reputation far worse than what eventually happened online. That detail bothered Natalie deeply because it contradicted everything she expected from a betrayed husband. Ethan didn't seem interested in punishing her. He seemed interested only in escaping her completely. And somehow, that hurt even more. The strangest question surrounding the entire case was also the simplest one. Why didn't Ethan hate her? By every reasonable standard, he had the right to. Natalie betrayed him repeatedly with someone inside his own family circle. She humiliated him publicly without realizing it. She lied for months while pretending their marriage was still intact. Yet according to everyone who spoke to Ethan briefly after he vanished, he rarely mentioned Natalie at all. No bitterness. No obsession. Just quiet detachment. Marcus once described it as the emotional equivalent of a controlled demolition. Ethan didn't explode outward. He collapsed inward and then sealed the damage behind him. For Natalie, that became impossible to accept because hatred would have at least proven she still mattered emotionally. Instead, Ethan treated her like someone already removed from his future entirely. And the closer she came to finally finding him, the more terrified she became of discovering whether that silence truly meant what she feared it did. Because if Ethan no longer hated her, there was a chance he no longer loved her either. And for Natalie Harper, that possibility felt worse than losing the marriage itself. But the most disturbing part of this story wasn't the affair, the disappearance, or even the public humiliation that followed. It was how calmly Ethan Cole walked away from the only life he had known for 11 years. As if somewhere deep inside himself, he understood immediately that the woman waiting behind that front door was never coming back. Before everything collapsed, Ethan Cole and Natalie Harper looked like the kind of couple people quietly envied. They lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Denver where every house looked almost identical from the street, the kind of place filled with trimmed lawns, neighborhood cookouts, and couples who waved politely at each other while walking dogs in the evening. Ethan worked remotely as a senior software engineer for a cybersecurity company, a career he spent nearly 2 decades building through discipline and consistency. Natalie worked in corporate marketing for a luxury hospitality group, a job that demanded travel, social networking, and constant interaction with people who measured success through appearances. Friends described Ethan as the calm center of every room he entered. He remembered birthdays, fixed things without being asked, drove Natalie to work during snowstorms even when it made him late for meetings. The type of husband who never forgot anniversaries and always checked whether his wife made it home safely after business trips. For 11 years, Ethan built his life around stability because he genuinely believed stability was one of the purest forms of love a person could offer another human being. And for a long time, Natalie believed that too. In old Facebook photos posted years before the affair, she looked genuinely happy beside him. There were road trips through Arizona where they posed smiling in front of desert sunsets. Christmas mornings in matching pajamas holding coffee mugs beside the fireplace. Summer weekends grilling burgers in the backyard while country music played softly through outdoor speakers Ethan installed himself. Their relationship wasn't dramatic or chaotic. There were no explosive fights, no separations, no cheating rumors before Ryan Calloway entered the picture. In fact, several friends later admitted Ethan and Natalie were considered one of the strongest marriages in their social circle because they rarely appeared unhappy in public. But over time, familiarity slowly transformed into emotional numbness for Natalie in ways she didn't fully recognize until much later. The routines that once made her feel safe started making her feel trapped instead. Ethan liked staying home on weekends. He enjoyed predictable schedules, quiet dinners, watching documentaries together late at night before falling asleep on the couch. Natalie slowly began interpreting his emotional steadiness as lack of passion. She didn't understand then that peace often feels boring to people addicted to emotional highs. The shift inside Natalie didn't happen overnight. According to therapy notes she later discussed after Ethan disappeared, the dissatisfaction started subtly around the 10th year of their marriage. She began comparing Ethan to other men constantly without realizing how dangerous that habit could become. Co-workers with expensive cars, confident executives at networking events, men who flirted aggressively and made her feel noticed in ways Ethan no longer did because he assumed she already understood how much he loved her. That assumption would eventually become one of the most painful parts of the story because Ethan never realized Natalie interpreted comfort as neglect. While he viewed their peaceful marriage as evidence they had built something solid together, Natalie quietly started craving uncertainty instead. Excitement, attention, validation from outside the life she already had. People close to her later described it as a kind of emotional restlessness that grew stronger each year. She wasn't unhappy enough to leave Ethan, but she also stopped appreciating the man standing directly in front of her. And that emotional gap became the opening Ryan Calloway eventually stepped through. Ryan entered their lives during a corporate fundraising event in Chicago nearly a year before Ethan vanished. At first glance, he was everything Ethan wasn't. Loud where Ethan was quiet. Charming where Ethan was reserved. Ryan carried himself with the confidence of someone who understood exactly how to manipulate attention inside a room. He wore tailored suits that looked expensive even to people who knew nothing about fashion. He spoke effortlessly to strangers, told stories dramatically enough that people leaned closer while listening. Natalie later admitted she noticed Ryan within minutes of meeting him because he made her feel exciting simply by focusing on her. Ethan loved her quietly. Ryan made her feel desired loudly. And for someone already struggling with feelings she didn't know how to explain, that difference mattered more than she wanted to admit. The first few months between them remained technically harmless. Lingering conversations after corporate dinners. Flirtatious jokes hidden behind professional language. Private text messages that slowly became more personal over time. Natalie convinced herself it wasn't crossing a line because nothing physical had happened yet. But emotional affairs rarely announce themselves clearly in the beginning. They grow gradually through secrecy, attention, and rationalization until boundaries disappear completely. What made the situation more dangerous was how naturally Ryan fit into Ethan and Natalie's social world. He wasn't some mysterious stranger from another city who could disappear easily after causing damage. Ryan became integrated into family gatherings and social events because of his marriage to Claire Wells, Ethan's cousin. Ethan trusted him completely. That trust created opportunities Natalie and Ryan never should have had. Double dates, weekend gatherings, football parties, shared vacations where nobody questioned why Ryan and Natalie occasionally disappeared into long private conversations while everyone else drank around backyard fire pits. Looking back later, several relatives admitted they noticed small moments that seemed strange in hindsight. The lingering eye contact, the inside jokes, the way Natalie laughed harder at Ryan's comments than anyone else's. But at the time, nobody wanted to believe two people inside the same extended family circle could betray their spouses so completely. Ethan especially never suspected anything because trust had become second nature to him. He loved Natalie with the confidence of a man who genuinely believed loyalty was mutual. That blind trust would later become one of the hardest things for Natalie to live with after he disappeared, because she realized Ethan never once checked her phone, questioned her whereabouts, or accused her of dishonesty even when the affair was already happening behind his back. The relationship between Natalie and Ryan intensified during business trips neither of them initially planned to share together. Ryan started extending work meetings just to spend extra time around her. Natalie began volunteering for conferences she previously avoided because she knew Ryan would attend. They created private routines hidden beneath professional excuses. Late-night hotel bar conversations, morning coffee runs before meetings, long emotional confessions about dissatisfaction inside their marriages. Ryan constantly reinforced the idea that Natalie deserved more excitement than Ethan could offer her. More passion, more spontaneity, more intensity. And slowly, Natalie began seeing her stable marriage through Ryan's perspective instead of her own. She stopped viewing Ethan as a loyal husband and started viewing him as an obstacle to the emotional adrenaline she now craved. That transformation didn't happen publicly. To everyone around them, Ethan and Natalie still looked normal. They still hosted dinners, still smiled in photos, still talked about future vacation plans and home renovations. But privately, Natalie had already started disconnecting emotionally from the life Ethan thought they were building together. At first, the relationship with Ryan was emotional. Secret messages during work hours, deleted conversations late at night, compliments she knew crossed boundaries but accepted anyway because they made her feel alive again. Natalie repeatedly told herself she would stop before things went too far. She believed she could control it, that she could enjoy the excitement without destroying her marriage completely. But emotional lines, once crossed often enough, become easier to ignore each time afterward. And eventually, what started as private attention between two unhappy people became something far more dangerous than either of them admitted out loud. Something hidden carefully enough that Ethan Cole continued sleeping beside his wife every night, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his entire marriage was already beginning to crack. The wedding took place in late spring, at a private estate just outside Nashville, where white tents stretched across perfectly cut lawns and string lights hung between tall oak trees like something out of a dream people pay to experience for a few hours. Ethan Cole arrived that afternoon with Natalie Harper by his side, both of them dressed in calm elegance that matched the atmosphere everyone expected from a family celebration. To the outside world, nothing about them looked broken. Ethan smiled politely at relatives. Natalie greeted guests warmly. Ryan Calloway stood nearby with his wife Claire Wells, Ethan's cousin, greeting people as if he belonged exactly where he was. Champagne flowed early. Laughter filled the garden. Photographs were taken constantly, capturing moments that looked perfect in every possible way. But beneath all of it, something unspoken already existed between Natalie and Ryan. Not visible to everyone, but heavy enough that every accidental glance felt charged with meaning neither of them should have been acknowledging. By the time the ceremony ended and the reception began, the emotional distance between appearance and reality had grown wider than anyone realized. Ethan gave a speech that evening in front of nearly 300 guests. He spoke about loyalty, commitment, and the quiet strength required to build a life with someone over time. His voice was steady, almost calm in a way that made people listen more carefully. He talked about trust not as something dramatic or emotional, but as something built in small decisions every single day. Natalie stood near the back of the ballroom listening, smiling at the right moments, clapping when others clapped. But what nobody in that room understood was that only a few feet away, the person Ethan trusted most in the world was already emotionally gone from the moment he started speaking. Ryan stood near the bar watching Natalie across the room, and without saying a word, they both understood something irreversible had already formed between them long before that night began. It started subtly, in the space between conversations, in the pauses where neither of them needed to explain anything out loud anymore. Natalie stepped away first under the excuse of fresh air, moving through the crowded reception hall toward a quieter hallway near the back of the estate. Ryan followed minutes later, careful not to draw attention, blending into the movement of guests so naturally that no one noticed anything unusual. The hallway near the service rooms was dimly lit, far from the music and laughter spilling from the main ballroom. The further they walked, the quieter everything became, until even the sound of celebration faded into something distant and muffled. What happened between them in those moments wasn't dramatic. There were no words of confession, no declarations, no hesitation that anyone could later point to as a clear turning point. It was simply the culmination of months of hidden conversations, private messages, and emotional boundaries already crossed too many times to count. And in that silence, the final line they should have never crossed disappeared completely. Inside the ballroom, Ethan continued speaking without knowing anything had changed. He finished his speech to applause, raising his glass with the same steady composure he always carried. People approached him afterward to thank him, compliment his words, and tell him how meaningful his perspective on marriage was. He smiled through every interaction, unaware that the foundation of everything he was describing had already been shattered somewhere behind closed doors only a short walk away. The contrast between his reality and Natalie's was so extreme that, in hindsight, people would later describe it as almost unbearable to think about. While Ethan stood in front of a room full of family and friends talking about trust, loyalty, and commitment, his wife was betraying him only a short distance away inside the same building, surrounded by the same celebration, in the same moment that was supposed to represent unity. No one noticed the shift at first when Natalie returned. She smoothed her dress, adjusted her expression, and re-entered the reception as if nothing had happened at all. Ryan returned separately, maintaining the same careful distance. To everyone watching, the night continued normally. Dancing resumed. Music grew louder. Guests laughed and toasted into the late evening hours. But something had already changed permanently, even if the people inside the room didn't realize it yet. Because what happened in that hallway didn't just cross a boundary. It dismantled it completely. The discovery came later that night, long after the guests had begun leaving and the estate had fallen into a quieter version of itself. Ethan was alone in the kitchen area of the house they were staying in temporarily, reviewing messages on his laptop, while Natalie was upstairs getting ready for bed. At first, there was nothing unusual. Then a notification appeared. Then another. Then a series of conversations that didn't make sense at first glance, but became unmistakable within seconds. Names, timestamps, emotional exchanges, and details that no misunderstanding could explain away. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't move immediately. According to everything later reconstructed from that night, he simply stared at the screen as the full weight of what he was seeing settled in without interruption. There was no shouting, no broken objects, no immediate confrontation, only silence. That silence lasted long enough for Natalie to come downstairs and see him sitting there. She noticed the screen before she noticed his expression, and in that moment, she understood everything had already shifted beyond repair. Still, Ethan did not raise his voice. He closed the laptop slowly, stood up, and walked past her without saying a word. He went upstairs and began packing a single suitcase, moving through their temporary room with controlled precision. No photographs were taken. No sentimental items were packed. Only what was necessary. Clothes. Essentials. Items that meant nothing beyond function. Natalie followed him, asking questions that started as confusion and quickly turned into panic, but Ethan did not respond. He continued packing as if her voice was coming from somewhere far away. The moment Natalie realized he wasn't coming back wasn't when he said goodbye, because he never did. It was when he walked downstairs, passed through the house they had shared memories in for years, and left their wedding photograph sitting face down on the kitchen counter without even looking at it. But Ethan wasn't just leaving the marriage. He was erasing himself completely. Within 72 hours after Ethan Cole walked out of that house, it was as if he had been systematically removed from the world he once occupied. His phone number stopped ringing and immediately routed to a dead line. Messages stopped delivering. Emails bounced back without explanation. His social media accounts, once filled with quiet glimpses of an ordinary life, disappeared one by one until there was nothing left to search for. Even his workplace confirmed he had not returned, and when Natalie Harper tried contacting colleagues, she was met with silence or refusal. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was absence on a level that felt intentional, like someone had gone through every digital thread tying Ethan to his old life and cut each one cleanly, without hesitation. Within 3 days, there was no trace of him online. No updates. No sightings. No digital footprint at all. Only silence where a full life used to exist. And that silence quickly became something heavier than Natalie expected. At first, she told herself Ethan just needed space. Time to process. Time to cool down. But as the days stretched into weeks, the absence stopped feeling temporary. It started feeling final. Friends who once supported her began shifting their tone when Ethan's name came up. Some stopped answering her calls altogether. Others spoke to her only in short, careful sentences, as if choosing words that wouldn't deepen what had already happened. The most painful shift came from Ethan's family, especially Claire Wells. Claire had once considered Natalie a close friend, someone she trusted enough to include in personal conversations, family gatherings, and private moments. But after everything surfaced, that connection collapsed completely. When Natalie finally managed to reach her, Claire didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult her. Her words were calm, almost controlled, which made them hit harder than anger ever could. "You didn't just cheat on him," Claire said quietly. "You humiliated him." That sentence followed Natalie everywhere afterward. Because it wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about exposure. About how deeply it cut into Ethan's identity as a man who had believed in loyalty without question. And now that belief was gone. Completely gone. Then the internet found the story. It started with a single anonymous post on a discussion forum that didn't name Ethan or Natalie directly, but described the situation in enough detail for people to connect the pieces quickly. Within hours, screenshots surfaced. Then interpretations. Then full threads dissecting every known detail of the marriage, the wedding, and the disappearance. By the next day, the story had spread across multiple platforms. Reddit threads exploded with speculation. YouTube creators turned it into breakdown videos. Comment sections filled with strangers debating morality, betrayal, and justification. And slowly, Natalie Harper stopped being a private individual with a broken marriage and became something else entirely. A symbol. A headline. A cautionary example repeated by people who had never met her but felt entitled to judge her anyway. The internet didn't just discuss the situation. It consumed it. And in that consumption, Natalie's name became attached to every version of the story, stripped of nuance, reduced to a single defining mistake that followed her everywhere she went. It was during this period of chaos that Natalie made a decision she would later describe as both desperate and irrational. She hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Reed, a former detective known for handling missing persons cases that others had given up on. Marcus didn't approach the situation with comfort or sympathy. He approached it like a problem that either had answers or didn't. The first time they met, he reviewed what little information existed and made an observation that stayed with Natalie longer than anything else anyone said during the entire process. "People who run usually leave patterns," Marcus said carefully. "Your husband didn't run. He disappeared on purpose." That distinction changed everything. Running implied panic. Disappearing implied intent. Marcus began tracing Ethan's financial activity, employment history, and digital footprint from the moment he left Colorado. But within a short period of time, something unusual happened. He found nothing. No suspicious transactions. No emotional communication with friends. No digital breadcrumbs that suggested stress or instability. Every account tied to Ethan Mercer had been either closed or cleanly transferred. It wasn't the behavior of someone escaping chaos. It was the behavior of someone who had already decided, long before leaving, exactly how he wanted to vanish. But what unsettled Marcus the most was not what he found. It was what he didn't find. No anger-driven actions. No attempts at revenge. No public exposure of Natalie's affair. Even though Ethan had access to everything he needed to destroy her reputation far more publicly than what eventually happened through anonymous internet leaks. Instead, there was restraint, precision, emotional removal rather than emotional reaction. And that made Marcus pause more than anything else in the investigation because it suggested Ethan wasn't acting out of pain anymore. He was acting out of completion. While Marcus continued digging, Natalie began to unravel in a different way. The absence of Ethan didn't just affect her emotionally. It started consuming her daily life. She checked old messages repeatedly, reread conversations searching for signs she missed, and created fake social media accounts hoping to see any trace of him online. She replayed memories constantly, trying to locate the exact moment everything shifted beyond repair. But the more she searched, the more unstable everything inside her became. At some point, the goal stopped being reconciliation. It stopped being explanation. It became something simpler and more painful. Proof that she still mattered to him in some way. At some point, the narration would later describe, Natalie stopped trying to save the marriage. She just needed proof she still mattered. That was when she finally agreed to see Dr. Evelyn Carter, a therapist who had worked with individuals dealing with severe emotional breakdowns following relational trauma. Dr. Carter didn't offer immediate reassurance. Instead, she listened carefully as Natalie described Ethan's disappearance, the affair, the fallout, and the silence that followed. The sessions became less about justification and more about confronting uncomfortable truths Natalie had avoided for months. "You keep calling it a mistake," Dr. Carter said during one session. "But mistakes happen once. This happened for months." That statement lingered in the room long after it was spoken, because it removed the last remaining illusion Natalie had been holding on to, that what happened could still be categorized as something accidental rather than intentional. And just when the silence from Marcus Reed stretched long enough to feel final, Natalie received a call that changed everything. Then Marcus finally called. The message began. He found Ethan. The location Marcus Reed sent was a small coastal town in Oregon, the kind of place that feels removed from everything Natalie Harper associated with her former life. No tall buildings. No noise of traffic that never stops. Just long stretches of gray ocean meeting a sky that seemed permanently overcast, as if the weather itself had settled into quiet acceptance. Natalie didn't expect to find Ethan Cole living anything close to normal after everything that had happened. She imagined isolation, maybe even visible damage from months of disappearance. But what she saw instead made her stop before she could even fully process it. Ethan was standing outside a modest office building near the waterfront, speaking casually with coworkers. He was laughing at something someone had said, not loudly or performatively, but naturally, like the kind of laugh that comes from not carrying anything heavy anymore. He looked different in a way Natalie couldn't immediately explain. Not just physically, though he was thinner, more relaxed, but emotionally. The tension that once lived in his posture was gone. His shoulders weren't tight anymore. His expression wasn't guarded. Even the way he stood felt lighter, like someone who no longer braced himself for impact. For a moment, Natalie felt something she hadn't expected. It wasn't relief. It wasn't anger. It was recognition that the version of Ethan she remembered might have already ended long before she ever found him. She followed him quietly as he left the building and walked toward the parking lot. The sound of the ocean nearby filled the silence between them, steady and indifferent. Ethan noticed her before she reached him, not with shock, but with the same calm awareness he seemed to carry everywhere now. The laughter from his co-workers faded as they stepped away, leaving only the distant sound of waves and wind moving through the open space. Natalie stopped a few feet away, struggling to find words that could hold the weight of everything she had carried for months. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't angry. It was broken in a quieter way. "How could you erase 11 years like they meant nothing?" Ethan didn't respond immediately. He looked at her for a long moment, not with hatred or frustration, but with something closer to exhaustion that had already been resolved. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, controlled, almost calm enough to feel unfamiliar. "I didn't erase them," he said. "I survived them." The words didn't land with force. They landed with finality. There was no accusation in his tone, no attempt to hurt her back, no emotional escalation. Just a statement that felt like it had already been processed long before he ever said it out loud. Natalie stood there waiting for something else, anything that would suggest there was still emotional ground left between them. But Ethan didn't give her that. Instead, he simply exhaled, as if releasing something he had been holding for a very long time. Then the silence stretched again, long enough that Natalie realized he wasn't going to fill it. When he spoke again, it was quieter, but it carried more weight than anything he had said before. "You abandoned me long before I left." That line didn't come with anger. It didn't come with revenge. It came with clarity, the kind that forms when someone has already accepted every painful truth and no longer needs validation from the person who caused it. Natalie tried to respond, but nothing came out immediately. Every explanation she had prepared over months of searching suddenly felt inadequate in the face of how calm he was standing there. He wasn't defending himself anymore. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't even trying to make her understand. He was simply stating what he had already decided was true. Ethan glanced briefly toward the ocean, then back at her, and for a moment his expression shifted, not into anger, not into sadness, but something far more difficult to accept. It looked like closure that didn't require her participation. "The hardest part wasn't losing you," he said quietly. Another pause followed, heavier than the first. "It was realizing the person I loved never really existed." For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The wind carried the sound of distant waves through the parking lot, filling the space where anything else might have been said. Natalie stood there trying to find something that could undo what she had just heard, but there was nothing left to undo. Ethan had already walked through that process alone, long before she ever arrived in Oregon. And now, standing in front of him, she understood something she had avoided accepting since the day he disappeared. He hadn't come here to rebuild anything. He had come here to recover from it. And in that moment, for the first time, Natalie Harper realized she hadn't found Ethan Cole to bring him back. She had found him after he had already let go completely. Natalie Harper stood there in the coastal parking lot long after Ethan Cole had stopped speaking, but the truth was, he didn't need to say anything else. Everything that needed to be understood had already been communicated in the way he carried himself, in the way he no longer reacted, in the way her presence no longer seemed to pull anything emotional out of him at all. There was no anger left in Ethan Cole, no pleading, no confusion, no desire to revisit what had already been decided. Just a quiet distance that felt heavier than any confrontation could have been. Natalie had come here expecting a final conversation, something dramatic, something emotional, something that proved she still had a place in his life, even if it was a painful one. Instead, she found something far more final than anything she had imagined. Natalie thought Ethan disappearing was revenge. But revenge requires hatred. It requires emotion strong enough to stay connected to the person who caused the pain. Ethan Cole didn't carry that anymore. Whatever he had felt in the beginning, shock, betrayal, heartbreak, had already been processed long before Marcus Reed ever found him. What remained was not anger. It was detachment, a complete emotional separation from the life he once built. And that was the part Natalie couldn't accept, because hatred still means you matter. Silence means you don't. Ethan didn't leave to punish her. He didn't vanish to make her suffer. He left because staying meant remaining tied to something he had already outgrown emotionally, even if it had once defined his entire life. In his mind, the story had already ended the moment he read those messages. Everything after that was just distance. And that realization is what broke Natalie more than anything else that had happened before it. Not the exposure, not the affair becoming public, not the collapse of her friendships or the judgment from strangers online. It was the understanding that Ethan Cole had moved beyond all of it without needing her permission, without needing closure, and without needing her to understand. Because for him, closure wasn't a conversation. It was removal. It was silence. It was leaving a life behind so completely that returning to it emotionally no longer made sense. Sometimes the loudest ending is silence. Natalie stood in that parking lot as the wind moved across the Oregon coastline. But Ethan Cole was already walking back toward his life, one she no longer belonged to in any capacity that mattered to him. There was no dramatic conclusion waiting for her. No final argument that could reset what had already been decided. Only the undeniable reality that some people don't leave loudly. They leave completely. Do you think Ethan Cole was justified for disappearing completely? Or did Natalie Harper deserve one final conversation? And if you thought this story is disturbing, wait until you hear what happened when another husband discovered a hidden phone his wife forgot to delete. Subscribe for more real-life, emotional thrillers.